Our public event tonight is to celebrate Earth Hour 2022. And so we are really happy to have with us a couple of friends from the Halifax Center. Lisa Ann Fanning from Lisa's Lookup is going to be chatting with us about animals and astronomical events. And Tim Doucette from Deep Sky Eye Observatory is going to be sharing with us an initiative to try to save some of the dark skies in Nova Scotia and how we can even address some of his ideas and apply them in our own cities and kind of try to hopefully take back some of those dark skies that as astronomers we know we're missing. Before we get to any of that, we like to start off our RASC Montreal Center public events with a land and sky acknowledgement. Land acknowledgements are a way for us to really indicate and respect the use of the caring of the land by the Indigenous peoples that we now share and live on and conduct our business on, as well as, for this case, we normally do our observing on. But at the Montreal Center, one of the things that we've been trying to do is to acknowledge as well that the skies are something that we share with the Indigenous peoples. And so at the moment, we are just past the full moon. We're actually at the 3/4 moon just yesterday. And the 3/4 moon this month is referred to as the hard crust on the snow moon by the Ojibwe of the Great Lakes. And I think a lot of us saw that over the last few weeks when we had a lot of snow and a lot of changes in temperature. That crust on the snow was something that was absolutely evident. But the Mi'kmaq of the East Coast call it the maple sugar moon. And I know my niece and my nephew today got to go and do maple taffy on ice. And so it's definitely maple sugar season. And so we can acknowledge that connection to nature and to what we see around us in the way in which we see the night sky. Now, before I go any further on the Montreal Center, we are pleased to have with us today our honorary president, David Levy. And I'm going to ask David to start us off with a welcome and a reading.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. This is a very special and emotional meeting for me, far more than I expected, because we are blessed here with some close friends that I've had when I first became associated with the Montreal Center from October the 8th, 1960. And friends that I have, very dear friends that I have. Robert, I think the last time I might have seen you might have been at the 1979 eclipse when you were at the planetarium in Manitoba. And I miss you a lot. And I'm so glad and overwhelmed to see you here today. Just delighted. Carl, you and I have been friends, dear friends, best friends, ever since 1963 when I came back from the Jewish National Home for Asthmatic Children. Isabel Williamson introduced young Carl Jorgensen and young David, and we've been friends ever since. Hasn't stopped for a minute. Klaus Brosh isn't here today, but he lives in Flagstaff right now, and I'm sure if he were here, he would send his best regards to everybody. And I wish we could have Constantine here, but as far as I know, he is still hospitalized, and news isn't really very good about him. But these are you are the friends of my youth, and I drink to our friendship. Which I hope will go on for a long time. Thanks, Robert. But as close as you are, I think that the friends that I've made more recently, like Kareem and a lot of you, still Carl, are even closer. And I drink to your friendship now as well. Tim Doucette, who is here and will be addressing us soon, people that I've met from across Canada and across the United States. So let's get to the quotation that I would like to give. Today it's going to be from an artist, a very famous artist, Vincent van Gogh, Dutch Impressionist painter who died in 1890 by suicide. And this quote is from a letter that he wrote to his brother Theo in 1888. There'll be a slight reordering of what he wrote, but he said, is the whole of life visible to us? Or do we in fact know only the one hemisphere before we die? In the same simple way, I dream I see the stars as I dream about black dots representing towns and villages on a map. Why, I ask myself, should the shining dots in the sky be any less accessible to us than the black dots on the map of France? And here is the key to it. For my part, I know nothing with any certainty, but the sight of the stars makes me dream. Thank you so much, everyone. And back to you, Kareem.
That was beautiful, David, and very poignant, especially with our topic for tonight. So I'm going to just share again quickly and tell you a little bit about the Montreal Centre for those of you that don't know too much about us. The first thing that I want to make sure is that everybody knows where Montreal is. So I figure with the topic for tonight, let's show a light pollution map and mention that Montreal is that really big light sink right up there by the Great Lakes. And unfortunately, for those of you who are aware of this, you'll shake your heads in misery as I do. We're the third worst light polluted city in the entire world. Unfortunately, that third worst is not, in terms of total amount of artificial light, because under that auspices, we're in the top 10, but we're not third worst. But it has to do with the fact that we are covered so much of the year in ice, snow, and surrounded by water. So there's so much reflected artificial light as well that bothers us here in Montreal. This is a picture taken by David Saint-Jacques when he was up on the ISS of the Montreal area, and you can see just the sheer amount of artificial light set up. And we've been doing some projects locally to try to work through some darkening of the lights chosen and the artificial lights chosen, but the private buildings, unfortunately, take over with very bad artificial lights. We're lucky to have our observatory in that little dark area, as well as our campus where we have our library set up, both in that tiny little dark area, the darkest skies on the island, Morgan Arboretum and John Abbott campus with McGill McDonald campus. Now, our center itself is over 150 years old. We have, at the moment, actually over 175 members, and we are still continuing bi-weekly meetings, and we've started them up right away as COVID hit. We just moved right onto Zoom. We have a dark sky observatory south of Montreal, close to the US border, called Woolly Woods. And there we have a 16-inch Explore Scientific light bucket, our 14-inch computerized telescope at Bellevue Observatory in Morgan Arboretum. And then we have our library, and we also have a lot of public talks, star parties, and outreach that we do in the Montreal area. Our Zoom discussions are continuing on, even as we start to try to get together in person. We have, unfortunately, some bad weather in Montreal at different times of the year, namely 365 days. But whenever we do get to get out together, we will. When we can't, we will be on Zoom, Wednesdays and Saturdays, starting at 8 for most Saturdays, except when we have public events like tonight. We also will be continuing our monthly citizen science episodes, and our next one is on April 13th at 8 o'clock. And if you're interested in sharing any of the interesting work that you do as an amateur astronomer, please don't hesitate to contact us. We'd love to include you in one of our citizen science nights. If you'd like to join us, the membership is pretty straightforward. It's, the best deal in the universe. You can come to rascmontreal.org/Titan and go to join us for the details on how to subscribe as a RASC Montreal Centre member. We also have a couple of awesome upcoming public events. The first one is on Saturday, April 9th at 7 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, and I will post the link to register in advance in the chat in a few minutes. But we have a student at Université de Montréal, a PhD student who was accepted as one of the researchers on the James Webb Space Telescope in their first set of missions. So she's going to be talking about looking at the TRAPPIST-1 exoplanet system and trying to characterize the atmospheres using the James Webb Space Telescope. And then on April 14th, just that same week, we're going to have lunar crater sketching as an online event that we are co-hosting with RASC National, given by our former president, Bettina Forget. And that's part of this initiative we're going to be doing over the next 2 months to celebrate the Artemis missions with the RASC and the Canadian Space Agency. And then I'll invite you to look forward to a May 7th amazing International Astronomy Day, where we're going to be doing Astrofest during the daytime at Rio Tinto Alcan Planetarium, potentially some parts at night as well, including hopefully a special keynote speaker that I'm not going to spoil right now. And then we have a live stream with RASC National as well. But we are here tonight for a much needed event. We want to talk about Earth Hour and that hour from 8:30 to 9:30 where we try to share the dark skies, but we want to talk about why we need these dark skies year round. And so to start us off, I'm happy to introduce to you Lisa Ann Fanning. Now, Lisa, I've gotten to know a lot through actually online during COVID times. We became friends as part of the audience of the Sunday Night Astronomy Show and started chatting a little bit. She's a member of the RASC Halifax Center, even though she lives in New Jersey. And she is a bird watcher and nature lover extraordinaire. And so I'm going to invite Lisa to talk to us a little bit today about the way in which animals respond to astronomical events and to light pollution. Lisa Ann, we are all yours.
Thank you so much. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to meet everybody in person. So many familiar names in the audience. Thank you so much for having me here. I always look for every excuse to possibly talk about birds. So some of these slides I've presented previously, but I did want to give them as a background, and then I'll talk about how they connect into light pollution. But first I wanted to make my own land acknowledgement. Here in New Jersey, I am seated on the lands of the Lenni Lenape people, and I honor them and the other indigenous caretakers of these lands and waters and the elders who lived here before the indigenous today and the generations to come. So this is talking about songbird migration and moon phases, and this is something that I've definitely been getting into lately because migration has started here in New Jersey. Some of the birds are on their way back from their wintering grounds and on their way headed up to you in Canada and points north onto their breeding grounds. I love this quote, that it was once thought that birds migrated to and from the moon each year. Charles Morton said that. He was a 17th century English minister and scientist. And so the thinking of the day was that birds go to the moon. That's where they migrate. But the truth of the matter is the birds, there's a study that says that birds actually use the full moons and the periods around the full moons to help facilitate their migration. And here I've captured some birds that are actually passing over some of the craters. These were taken during the fall migration a few years ago. And, you know, I was excited. I was out with my scope. I was doing Explore the Moon, and I was so excited to see these birds passing, and I made this my challenge, and this continues to be my challenge. And I've recently captured some video as well, and I think I'm gonna make this my April project around the full moon as well. So, you know, I thought I invented this newfangled way of counting for migration at night. But actually, moon watching for migration was first described by George Lowry and Robert Newman in the 40s through the 60s. They figured that nocturnal migrants could be seen better because they're not observable by naked eye at night. So they pointed a telescope at the illuminated disk of the moon and realized that this is a great way to count the passing birds as they migrate during their heavier periods of migration. So I mentioned that some bird species actually do use the moon to facilitate their migration. There was a study that was done in Europe, and it's related to the European nightjar, which is related to our American whippoorwills, for anybody who's familiar with that family of birds, the poorwill family. And Lund University in Sweden, a number of folks got together, did a study in 2019, and they charted the activity of 39 European nightjars, and they figured out that these European nightjars were using the moon not only for nocturnal hunting activity for flying insects, but also they departed for autumn consistently around 10 to 11 days after the full moon. And we see similar patterns here in the United States and in Canada with migration of our birds as well. So here is a slide that shows NextRad. So this is the next generation radar, and it shows real-time maps that show concentration of migrating birds, bats, and insects. This is funded by Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and they produce these birdcast maps. So you can go to them real time and see where the concentrations of birds are. So here I mapped out the previous fall's migration, so the heavier periods of migration on the full moon on the left, and the new moon. And you can see that there are definitely fuller concentrations around the full moon that the birds get up. And in this case, this was southbound migration. So I took that one step further, and I decided to map out the migration based on the moon cycle. And we could see a lot of peaks around the full moon. There are some peaks around the new moon. There's a little abnormality there where we do see a dip around the new moon in October, but just prior to the new moon, we do see a peak of migration. What happened there was that the weather, if you'll recall, last early October was we had some like a string of bad weather there. So the birds actually backed up and they departed for southbound points just prior to the new moon. Here's a project that I love. So this is saw-whet owl migration. Saw-whet owls are very secretive, and so studies on them definitely rely very heavily on banding data. They typically breed in higher elevations. They migrate in the winter. The male birds will stay behind to defend their territories, and the female birds are the ones who wander. So every 4 years here in the States and point south, we have these eruption years where these wandering female birds will wander in higher numbers, and they do migrate at night. So that's me on the left making a new friend there. I did get to help out with a study with Professor Tom Brown, who bands here. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But so several studies actually suggest that the higher moon illumination has an inverse relationship with capture rates of saw-whets. So there are a couple of theories behind that. Increased moonlight causes greater misnet visibility. Also, it's lower because they're concerned, the saw-whets are concerned about being predated by larger owls. And rodents are also not as active in brighter conditions to avoid being predated. So the saw-whets are not going to, any bird really is not going to move unless there's a food source that's available. They're not going to expend the energy. So our local saw-whet owl banding project is here under the leadership of Professor Tom Brown. He is a federally licensed bird bander here in the United States. He bands on Sandy Hook, which is part of Gateway National Park, which is part of New York and New Jersey. The Jamaica Bay is another part of Gateway National that is a very significant migration point of migration. But Gateway National Sandy Hook is here in Monmouth County, New Jersey, and he collects data about saw-whets. And he's part of a network of licensed banders all throughout the US who share information about these studies. And there are also several saw-whet banding stations in New Jersey. So he gave me his data, and I was chomping at the bit to slice and dice this data. And we could see that if you take the top two, or I guess you could say the lower two tiers of lunar illumination, and you can see that the capture rates are better when there is much lower illumination. So this is like an opposite example of how the moon would affect birds. This was something else that I came across that I love. Indigo buntings and stars. There was a 1967 study that tested the role of stars and what it plays in species southbound autumn migration. And the way that they tested this is that birds were placed in special cages with a starlit dome that simulated the rotation of the night sky. Now, birds will orient themselves the way that they would in the direction that they wish to fly. So when they removed certain star patterns around the North Star, the birds became disoriented. So this helped the researchers conclude that individual stars don't matter to the birds as much as the pattern of the stars. So, I included these examples because when we talk about light pollution, it only makes me ask the next set of questions, which is if you throw light pollution into the mix, how is it affecting these birds' migration patterns? So I think we all know the great example of solar eclipses and how it affects animals. Birds quiet thinking it's nighttime, bats become more active. Even in Africa, we see hippopotami that exit rivers for their nocturnal roosting spots. Same with cows, and spiders that typically take their webs down at night do so during a solar eclipse. And, you know, people talk about hearing crickets chirp and bees returning to their hives. So, you know, once again, this is just more proof that the amount of light does affect animal behavior. So this one, if anybody knows Renat, she's a wonderful artist. She's also one of the regulars from the Sunday Night Astronomy show. And she asked me if I knew about the dung beetles. And, you know, dung beetles, sure, why not? She told me about this study that was recently done that actually proved that African dung beetles orient themselves to the starry sky. And it was actually the first proof that insects or anything in the animal kingdom first documented use of the Milky Way for orientation in the animal kingdom. And this study also came out of Lund University. So a lot of great work coming out of Lund University in this space. And then researchers did construct an artificial Milky Way to use to find out how the variance in brightness between different sections of the Milky Way will also affect navigation by the beetles. So why does light pollution matter? I mean, I talked about all these instances where moonlight affects animal behavior and sunlight affecting animal behavior. So there are a lot of studies taking place right now. The National Science Foundation is leading the way. They did a study in Nature about how noise and light pollution affect breeding birds in North America. Researchers from the NSF-funded research data spanned the reproductive success from over 142 species across North America. The findings were that light pollution will cause birds to begin to nest up to a month earlier than normal in open environments such as grasslands and wetlands, and 18 days earlier in forested environments. So the implication is that as chicks are hatching, there's a mismatch in timing. So chicks that may rely on insects, for example, you know, the timing is just not right. So the food sources are not there, and their viability, unfortunately, decreases. The same study actually found that noise pollution also impacts birds in a forest environment. It will delay the nesting for birds whose songs are at a lower frequency, so they can't hear over human noise. And the next steps in this study is that they are developing a sensitivity index for all of the North American birds to try to figure out how each species is impacted. Now that's really important because if you're familiar with the study that came out that says that since 1970, there have been over 3 billion birds that have been lost. And, you know, it looks at species from grasslands that are probably the mostly impacted as far as loss of habitat and some of these other implications as well. So migrating birds, we have millions of birds that migrate between their wintering grounds and breeding grounds. One very famous long distant migrant is the black-polled warbler, and I did include a map of their migration. They weigh less than a half an ounce, and they travel between points in Canada and the Caribbean or South America. So they have a 1,500-mile migration. So I wanted to use them as an example, and that's what a black-polled warbler looks like. Tiny little thing, and he travels all that way just to meet up with his mate and continue the species. So one of the challenges, and I do apologize for this photo, but it really does, a picture does tell a story, but most species migrate at night when predators are less active. So collisions with buildings occur when nocturnal migrants are attracted to the windows of office buildings. You know, lights are frequently left on in these office buildings. There's a lot of work in the major cities to try to get these office complexes to turn their lights off. There's a study that says that even 20 minutes of turning the lights off for 20 minutes will actually make an impact in these numbers and help save some of the birds. But most of the strikes are fatal because these birds are flying through and they get tricked. They're attracted to the lights. And this particular example, unfortunately, this was a female common yellow throat that I found outside my office building in Jersey City at the time. This was taken on May 10th, 2013. The night before, I remember, was a very heavy night of migration. You know, you could step outside and hear the chip notes overhead. I did unfortunately find a stunned catbird, 3 deceased white-throat sparrows, and this beautiful lady who unfortunately did not make it. And that was just outside my office building alone in Jersey City. For those of you who are not familiar, Jersey City is just across the river from New York City. So I did mention about them striking the office buildings. There's an estimated 600 million birds that die from building collisions each year in the US. That statistic has been published by Cornell Lab of Ornithology. So, you know, we talk about some of the work in big cities, but here's a this is a special situation, and this one's kind of hard because I don't really know, you know, the balance between human and nature. But September 11th, we have in Lower Manhattan, this is a little hard to talk about, but we have a monument down in Lower Manhattan, remembering, you know, the lives that were lost on 9/11. And there are lights that simulate where the towers were. And we've actually, scientists have actually done some studies and estimate that 160,000 birds are impacted. Now, those are not deaths. That could be, you know, birds that are stunned or birds that fly toward the light. And I do love that picture that was taken, that lower picture that shows birds, bats, and insects that are drawn to the lights. You know, if you know, you leave your porch light on, and the moths will just sort of accumulate around the porch light. You know, think of that, but think of that on a larger scale. So, you know, the goal is not to shut down the monument, because it really is important to those of us who have lost friends and colleagues on 9/11, but to understand the impact and do studies and understand maybe how we can you know, lessen the impact, but still you know, carry on with this tradition. So the solution, Lights Out Baltimore, I think, was the first organization that I was aware of, and I'm not implying that they're the first organization to address this, but they certainly did do a great PR campaign about saving Baltimore's birds. And they put out a statistic that says that every 9 seconds a bird dies from colliding with a building. They're a nonprofit sector of the Baltimore Bird Club, and they do a lot of education. And this is just one example of the organizations that talk about, you know, advocating for turning out lights in April, May, September, and October, which are the very heavy migration periods. And they help businesses mitigate this problem as well. So they are providing education and resources to help save the birds and bats. And they certainly are not the only example of an organization that's doing that. On the top there, we talk about Keeping Birds Safe. That's New Jersey Audubon, of which I am an associate naturalist, so I am affiliated with them and proud of the work that they do. New York City Audubon does wonderful work for Project Safe Flight. Dallas, which is one of the 3rd top impacted cities, that they're doing a lot to say lights out. And then Chicago, I believe, is the top city in America that's impacted by this, and they have definitely led the way as far as trying to advocate for urban areas to take care to minimize what they call ALAN, artificial light at night, and try to mitigate some of the loss that we're experiencing as a result of artificial light. So my plea to you is be a part of the solution. You know, what could you do? Advocate, be a leader in this space. You know, in my example about the birds hitting the building in Jersey City, that was just one example of one night. I went to my building, to the real estate people in my building, and tried to get them to understand what the impact was. And I also did, you know, try to connect them with New Jersey Audubon. And now New Jersey Audubon is doing a lot of work in that space in Jersey City and Newark and some of the more heavily populated areas in New Jersey. influence, education, and partnership. Those are really important and really key. And I'm sure that Tim will echo the same thing. So thank you so much. And any questions?
Thank you very much, Lisa. I have posted, if anybody has questions, they can write them in the chat. But if you'd like to ask directly under reactions, you can raise your hand and I'll call on you and you can unmute and ask. One question that was popped in to the chat was the question of, I guess it's addressed kind of in this partnership part, but do you know if the bird societies and the Audubon, if they're partnering with astronomers or with other institutions that are right now trying to do something about light pollution? I know some of the wildlife or wildflower associations, wetlands associations have been talking a little bit about doing something together. Are the bird societies working with anyone?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with any specific examples of where they're partnering, but certainly I'm in contact with the head of New Jersey Audubon, and he's familiar with some of the work that I'm doing in this space, and I'm not shy about picking up the phone and talking to him directly. So I think he's aware now. We've certainly had conversations that there is this connection and a lot of commonality, and maybe we can partner together. So hopefully more to come, and that's where I say advocacy and leadership matter.
Well, I will offer, if the Audubon Society wants to connect with the Astronomical League or with the RASC for the Dark Skies initiatives, we can put something together to start that communication going.
Absolutely. I'll try to bring us together.
Awesome. If anybody does have questions, please don't hesitate to raise your hands. There's a lot of thank yous and great presentations in the chat, so I'll let you spend some time reading those. In the meantime, I guess we'll move on to our second speaker, and then we'll take questions and open discussion at the end with everyone. So I want to introduce you next to Tim Doucette. Tim is a member of the RASC Halifax Center. He is the head of Deep Sky Eye Observatory. He has been, I guess, back on his astronomical journey for the last 20 years, I believe. And for the last 7, he's been doing a little bit more in terms of astrophotography, but also now running this astrotourism site in Nova Scotia. So caring about keeping the dark skies in Nova Scotia is right up the alleyway for him. And so I'm going to ask Tim to share with us this new initiative that he's been leading in Nova Scotia, as well as some that he gives for fighting light pollution. So Tim, we are all yours.
Thank you very much, Karim, and thank you again for inviting me to come speak to you today. And it's always a pleasure. So I am going to share my screen, and we will get started. There, you should be able to see the.
We see it perfectly.
Okay, so yeah, well, this talk is called "Cap the Light, Save the Night." There's a few things I'd like to go over with you today that I think most of you know a lot of this, but it'll kind of give you an idea of what we've sort of had to go through in our neck of the woods in order to, fight light pollution. So we'll be answering some of the really important questions, and the most important really is, what we're doing and what can you guys do about light pollution, and why should you even care about it? So just a little introduction about myself. I have been involved in astronomy as a member of RASC since 2004. And most recently, my journey took me back to my hometown of Quinnen back in 2014. I now run a astrotourism experience. One of the projects we've done is the Nocturnal Sky Theater. And it's sort of an astronomy slash, nature retreat. As you could tell from the photo where we are in Quinnen, just about 30 minutes from the town of Yarmouth, which has about 7,000 people. Our little community of Quinnen is only about 200 people. And, we've actually had a big influx of people in the last little while because of the, of course, COVID and people wanting to get out to the country. But this kind of started, I had my observatory, Deep Sky Eye, down in Moncton for several years. And we moved back to Nova Scotia, to my hometown, for family reasons. And at the time, there was a group that was trying to get our area certified for its dark skies. And they had contacted and were trying to get these certifications through the Starlight Foundation. And the Starlight Foundation was created in 2009 from the Canaries Astrophysics Institute. And they are basically responsible for managing and promoting the night skies, astronomy, astrotourism, education, protection of the night sky, the whole bit. So after working with the auditors for several months, Southwest Nova Scotia became the first starlight tourist destination and reserve in North America, and currently is the only one. We're the fourth one in the world to have two designations. One is a starlight reserve, which is similar to the dark sky preserve of that RASC designates. And we're the fourth in the world to have both of these designations. And we call it Acadian Skies and Mi'kmaq Lands. So we have, our village is, half Acadian, half Mi'kmaq. We all have Indian blood in our blood, and I'm essentially Métis. My grandparents, one was Métis, one was Acadian, one was Indian. So I should say Mi'kmaq, and so it was well received, and we're still working, trying to find connections with the Mi'kmaq people to help developing our area. We've had stargazing experiences that have popped up since we've started this program. Besides Deep Sky Eye, we have infrastructure. We're actually working on additional infrastructure with trails and planet walk trails. Trout Point Lodge is the first starlight hotel that was in North America. There's people that do night walks along the beach talking about the stars and the culture of the Mi'kmaq people and the Acadians and how they use the stars. So it's becoming a very well-known tourist area. And I'll talk a little bit as well about that after. But of course, you know what light pollution is. It's light that is shines where you don't need it, and where it's not needed or wanted. And we're measuring the sky darkness, of course, as using the Bortle scale. Many of you know this already, but it's interesting to see that about 80% or so of people live under light polluted skies, and about 65% of people that visit the Deep Sky Eye Observatory have never seen the Milky Way. And it's really, it never gets old. People that come to the observatory, we're inside at dusk, and then we do a little presentation, and then we go outside, and then all of a sudden they open the door of the observatory, and boom, the Milky Way is like right in their face, and it just blows them away every time. We're in a Bortle 2 1.5 sky where I am. I'm being in the village, and going outside, even 10 minutes beyond us, you hit Bortle 1 skies. So it's quite nice and dark. Different types of light pollution. Of course, you have light trespass. It's very hard to control, but it's doable. You've got glare. That's the blinding light that you see if you're driving down the street and somebody flashes their light kind of thing in your eyes. It really blinds you, and there's different levels of glare. You have to be kind of cautious about that. We have sky glow, which is essentially the light that's shining up into the sky that's refracting off all of the particles in the air, and that blocks our views from the stars. And of course, light clutter, which also contributes to sky glow, but it's very disorienting. From here, from Quinnen, I have been keeping track over the years of how we've been doing as far as light pollution. And unfortunately, with the invent of the LED lights, in recent years, back in 2000, and I guess it would have been 2019, the town of Yarmouth replaced their lighting, but unfortunately, my memo never made it to the councillors, and they used the wrong kind of lighting. So now it's kind of become a retrofit project. As you can see, I just threw up here our light pollution map. You can see we're in a very, sort of a hole in Nova Scotia. And, we're trying to control that light pollution. We're very lucky that the town of Yarmouth now has regulations regarding any new businesses that they have to conform to dark sky lighting practices. So that's really exciting. So understanding a little bit about light, and I won't jump too deep into this, but I do want to give an idea so everybody kind of gets a handle on it and how it's important for you to be able to, understand these pieces of light. Of course, brightness is the first thing we think about, and we used to be able to measure, brightness of a light using watts, which is really not correct. It's wattage is really the amount of power it uses. So now we use lumens. So that's a sort of a trick that people have to start to get used to. Lumens essentially is candle power. There's a nice little chart there that shows that. The color of the light is very important. Anything beyond 3000 Kelvin we call a bioactive light, which affects animals, as you could see from Lisa Ann's presentation. It also affects humans as well. Shielding is really important and is sort of instrumental in reducing that amount of lights that shine up into the night sky. And of course, timing is really important as well. The timing when you have your lights on, motion sensors make a really great, security feature for people that are kind of scared of the dark. We've had an influx of people that have moved from the city, and the first thing they do when they come here, oh, it's really dark, and they call Nova Scotia Power and get a light put on. So that's another project that we've been working with Nova Scotia Power on the selection of the next generation of street lighting for Nova Scotia for dark sky friendly street lighting. So a couple of myths that people really have to understand, and I think it's something that's sort of sometimes misleading, but the more light equals better security, and that's not always true. It's more light does not equal better security. And here's a couple of little examples. You can see the gentleman who's in it's a very well lit area. But you see that gentleman, well, he's actually still there in this slide, but you can't really see him very well. He's hiding in the sharp shadows of the actual light pole. So it's all about lighting design and making sure that you can try to avoid sharp shadows, not over illuminating places for no reason. So ultimately, better light equals better security. The better you design your lighting. So here's an example of a before and after retrofit of lighting. Most people, like 90% of people, have a light. They just throw it on the side of their house or their apartment, and it's shining everywhere, into the sky, into the trees. And you can see people could be hiding anywhere around those vehicles, around the corners of the building. Doing a little retrofit, you can do quite a better job of lighting your area to make it safer and more environmentally friendly. Another myth is sort of more light equals improves visibility. Well, not exactly. Looking at that first photograph, the gentleman that's hiding in the, coming out of the gate there from the backyard, you wouldn't see him if that light was blinding you in the eyes. So why should you care about this lighting, and light pollution? Well, one of the biggest things is, of course, human health. They're finding studies now that exposure to blue light, as many of us know, is harmful. It basically stops the production of melatonin, which helps you sleep at night. There's been a huge influx in the last 20 years with sleep disorders, sleep disorders and insomnia, and it's directly related to white LED lights. And of course, nocturnal life is really dependent on having dark skies at night for the animals to survive and to thrive, reproduce, pollinators, the whole bit. And there's a lot of species in danger. Of course, it also affects the plants, trees, migratory birds, as Lisa Ann mentioned, ecosystems, as they found out in Rideau Ferry with algae growth and the destruction of one of the lakes there that had an over algae bloom because of lights that were shining on the side of the that they put on the shoreline that were bioactive lights, basically making it 24-hour daylight. Of course, astronomy suffers when we can't see what's up there. We can't learn from what's up there. And of course, our human connection to nature. I mean, we've been here for 1 million years, and, the earth has been dark, for that. And it's only been sort of lit up all night in the last, 100 years or so. So what are we doing about light pollution? Well, in our area here, we've been, teaching people about light pollution, and we are also changing laws regarding outdoor lighting. We've been very fortunate that we've partnered with provincial organizations like Efficiency Nova Scotia, Nova Scotia Power, the Argyll, Clare, and Yarmouth municipalities, and Nova Scotia Tourism. We're very excited that this year, Nova Scotia Tourism, we're working with them. We're putting we're putting a page on their website that is essentially a stargazing webpage. So people can go who are visiting our community, and they'll be able to, have they have an accommodations, restaurants, they'll have a stargazing section. So that's really, really exciting. And that's going to bring a lot of people to our area. We've already had several people come to our area strictly for that. Argyll, our municipality now has bylaws in pertaining to all sectors for land use, and they've incorporated lighting practices in land use. So now anybody that moves to our area, or actually even a business that's starting up, they have to conform. They get a little pamphlet with their building permit, and they have to follow the practices that we've outlined. We also have a light pollution bylaw that is nearly complete on its own as a nuisance bylaw as well. So that's really exciting, and we're going to be able to change some of the existing problematic areas of our region. So what can you guys do? Well, first thing you want to do is ask yourself when you go for lights is, what type of light do you need? The why, where, when, and how. And that will sort of, if you can answer those questions, then you can kind of think about, okay, I need a certain kind of shielding. I need a certain color, a certain brightness. I need to make sure, do I need it on at a certain time? And I have to think about my neighbors. And when I talk about neighbors, I don't just mean my human neighbors, but my animal neighbors as well. And we've found, and I can give you tons of examples, but one local example is in 2016, when we first opened the observatory, we had snapping turtles come from the river. As you can see, it's a lot of rivers and lakes. And we had snapping turtles come to our property all the time, digging and putting their eggs, laying their eggs. And it was pretty awesome. And one neighbor decided he was going to put a street light at his property, essentially just for spite. And it, in the last few years, the last couple of years, we noticed that we've hardly had any turtles. We've maybe seen one or two. And we're thinking that the light that's shining in the marshland is actually confusing them as well. So we're working on that as another issue. Suggestions on how you guys can approach your neighbors, concerning light pollution. Be tactful about it. You have to remember that people have the right to light up their property. And it's a matter of teaching them how to do it correctly. Strike up a conversation. I tend to do this sometimes with my neighbors. Hey, I was wondering if you could help me out for a bit. And most people are pretty, like 90% of people are pretty happy with, helping you out with that sort of thing. Help people get the proper fixture or the proper light if you can. And keep in mind, not everybody's going to agree with you. And sometimes you can't even reason with the unreasonable. So that's where the bylaw officer comes in. So, as far as your community goes, it's really important for your community. Express your concerns to your community leaders, your counselors, your mayor, whoever it happens to be. Write a letter to your local paper. Get advice from, or other organizations like the RASC or the IDA. And even our committee, we've started our own organization called the Starlight Development Committee, and we're actually going to be converting it to a nonprofit organization just because, we're sort of expanding, and we've gotten big enough now that a small group of volunteers is just not enough. A little project you could do, of course, you've probably seen this before, is building your own little light fixture. I took it one step further, and I bought a 3D printer, and now I print my own light fixtures, and you know, put it on a light, and you've got light directed down. It's very solid, and it works really well. Yeah, that's there's a few examples of poor lighting. I'll just kind of good lighting and poor lighting and retrofitted lighting. You can see some examples here. Here's an example of poor lighting at the close to the Deep Sky Eye Observatory next door, with the lighting shining, street light pointed horizontally, which is not a good thing. A couple of good examples. The old sodium lights were actually really good lights. Unfortunately, when they didn't have any shielding on them, it kind of made them, biggest problem with sky glow. Lights shining up. There's a lot of these lights shining up into properties now that people will put to light up their buildings. And that's, kind of a pain. We recommend that people, try to light the property from the top down. Same with the trees. There's people that sort of tend to put spotlights pointing up into trees to whatever the excuse is to keep the beavers away or whatever in our area. But, we try to recommend that they do it the other way around. Here's an example of, this is our cabin that we rent out, our Sky cabin. It has and this is a very long exposure, actually. It's almost a minute long. But I'm using one of the eco lights that were designed and developed by a RASC member. It works very, very well. Here's another retrofitted light. That was from a friend of mine in New Brunswick. I had a problem with his neighbor and ended up getting a light changed so that it's not shining everywhere. It's got the proper shielding and the proper installation. Some of the types of lights that you can buy, the eco light, again, is Robert Dick, who has invented this very nice light for, reducing the environmental impact. So it's low impact lighting. Another type of light that I use actually is lights that you can buy at Costco. And they're very, very nice. Actually, I bought like almost 100 of them. And they actually have like a 2700 Kelvin lighting color temperature. So they're really good. They're solar powered. And if you put them on a taller post, they're actually pathway lights. But if you put them on a slightly taller post and make them about, 4 or 5 feet high, they do a really great job of lighting a nice little area. I put a red tape on it for the areas that are close to the observatory and close to the sky bubble tent, just to increase your ability to keep your night vision even longer. So those are just a few examples. So my message is sort of let's protect our starry night skies for generations to come, because I think it's really important, and not just for facts. And I stress this a lot because I own my own star astrotourism business. I've been fighting the light pollution fight for many years before that, and now it's become more important, especially with areas that are already dark, and we're trying to keep them dark. It makes things a lot easier. And yeah, so thank you very much. And if you have any questions, feel free. And these are just a few photographs that I took from our dark sky area here with my telescope and whatnot. I do a lot of astrophotography on the side, and when I have time, it's a pretty busy place, I'll tell you. And every once in a while, we get a chance to see the Northern Lights here too. So that's it. Thank you very much.
This was fantastic, Tim, and kudos for the amount of amazing work. I think you also just got first light for one of your new telescopes, right?
Yeah, we're very excited about that. We have 2 new telescopes that we'll be sharing with our guests that come. We got a 16-inch Meade light bridge, and I just got the tracking platform installed. So now it tracks the rotation of the Earth. I don't have to keep moving it around. So it'll be, usable by the guests. And one of our RASC members has donated a F11 astrophysics refractor for planetary and lunar observing. So
Wow.
pretty, yeah.
That's fantastic. There was a question in the chat about the Costco lights. Do you know the brand or the model of the Costco lights that you're suggesting?
I can send you a link to them if you like. You can just, I don't know if it's easier if I just send you a link, or you can send me an email, whatever works. But they're called solar.
It's Gregory from. Trying to remember where Gregory was from. He's joining us from. We were just chatting. Brooklyn? No. Yes, Brooklyn. Okay. So finding them at Costco might not be the same brands in the U.S. than in Canada.
Right.
Yeah. No, I was just thinking that when I was, yeah. So that's going to be one. Another question that was sent in privately was asking how long the process took you to get bylaws put in your municipality.
So it took, they were in the process about 3 years ago to revamp the land use bylaw. So we had been talking to them for some time, but in the end, it took approximately three years to get it put through.
Okay, 3 years. So I know in some countries they have, dark sky committees within the government, and we don't seem to have that here in Canada or in the US. It doesn't seem to be a priority. Do you have any suggestions in terms of things that you gave an idea of how to approach things on a local level, but I know the RASC has been trying for years to try to get some attention paid to this at a larger scale. And I know locally I've tried in the past talking to Quebec Hydro to see if there's any way to bring them on board on something like this. How were you able to go about getting the Nova Scotia Energy on board with this?
Well, that's actually quite interesting because, see, for us, because we started to, so we have a committee called the Starlight Development Committee, and we have about six members, and we were starting to try and connect with the different organizations. So the first problem we were having, and this only happened a couple of years ago, is when we had people moving in to our area, and they would install a streetlight. You can call Nova Scotia Power and say, I need a streetlight, you have to pay for it and whatnot. So we said, well, let's see if we can figure out a way. We wonder if there's a way that they could, when a resident calls and says, hey, I'm at 237 Front Road, I need a streetlight here, that the power company can have the responsibility to train their employees to say, to look on a map and say, oh, you're in the dark sky preserved area. You need to have this light, and this is how we have to install it. So when we approached them about this, they were just all on board. They said, we're in the process of actually looking at the next generation of streetlights. What can you tell us about this? So essentially what happened is they ended up having she told me that the lady that was in charge of the project, she said, this wasn't a big project. She said, this was actually a little tiny page on a engineer's desk saying, pick the next generation of streetlights.
Oh,
and
wow.
now because of what we've approached them with and how, we're trying to become energy conscious, they basically have a committee that's looking into this fully, which is really good. What we did as well is we connected. So the power company has the backing, sort of has the finances, right? And the Energy Efficiency Nova Scotia has the political backing. So when we connected the two together with a meeting, of course, Energy Efficiency Nova Scotia was like, well, we can provide rebates for street lighting and for regular street, for residents that want to do, dark sky friendly lighting. So then we said, okay, this is great. And, Nova Scotia Power was on board with it. And now we've kind of merged it into the tourism sector because we've shown that we've been bringing people here. So now the dollars are starting to talk. And that's kind of how we made the connection. And of course, our environment has been huge. Because we're part of the UNESCO biosphere, it's sort of all played together in one.
And that's a key thing for your area, which is that you are dark sky designated in and around that area. And so there is attention being paid, which is fantastic. There were questions about the tourism side of things. When should people come and see you? When's a good time to come for a stay at the Deep Sky Eye Observatory? Is it any time of the year, or are there specific times when you think it's best off?
I've been finding that our best months have been, so our accommodations are open from June to September. The sky bubble tents, because they are heated, but they can't be heated during the winter months. It just gets too cold. It would cost a fortune. So we heat them up in the summer to keep the dew from forming on the lenses on the tents. And the observatory experience is normally open year round. We normally run year round with the experience itself, the Nocturnal Sky Theater. We usually have a different program in the wintertime just because it's colder. It's a little bit shorter for people. And, not everybody wants to stand out and freeze, in the freezing cold all the time. So I would recommend, if you're coming, come in July, August, September. Those are the best 3 months.
And not everybody wants to freeze, but that picture you showed of Orion at your cabin was just breathtaking still.
Thank you. I do a lot of that in the winter time. It's we've been making a lot of changes to the observatory, so we're closed now until June. We're putting a ramp so we can wheel out the telescopes and all that sort of fun stuff. So, and we're actually increasing our capacity from 10 people to 30 people for the experience. So.
That's fantastic. And so how many of the bubble tents, you have one cabin, and how many of the bubble tents do you have?
We have 3 bubble tents. One of them has a queen size bed, and 2 of them have queen size beds, sort of for 2 people kind of thing. And we have a family tent that has 2 double beds. They're pretty big. They're 16 feet across, about 12 feet high.
What are the chances of seeing the Northern Lights where you are?
It's not that high. It all depends what's happening on the sun. But we've only seen the Northern Lights probably once a year on average. It's not the best for Northern Lights viewing, because we're further south even than like Halifax. So
Right.
And near the waterfront, how close is the waterfront to you?
So the water, we have a lake, a river. So it's called the Quinnen River, and it's really a beautiful lake. Where the cabin is waterfront. It's 10 meters, 20 meters down. So we have for people that stay overnight, we have kayak boats that they're able to use as part of the rental. So kayak boats, you can go kayaking. We have a fire pit. We also have a propane fire pit for when there's a fire ban, which happens a lot in the summertime. So people can still enjoy their marshmallows and their campfire next to the river. If you want to purchase a fishing license, you can fish there as well. So it's like I say, it's a nature / astronomy adventure.
I think we're all whetting our appetites for the summertime. I'm going to end the formal part of the event, and I'm going to thank both Lisa Ann as well as Tim for their amazing presentations. Thank you for sharing your wonderful insight, the research that you've done, the work that you've done locally, as well as a little bit of a flavor for why it's important for us to pay attention to the amount of light pollution that we have and try to fight back against it. So I encourage everyone to stay for another 15 minutes or so. We're going to open up to just a general discussion, and then to please observe Earth Hour from 8:30 to 9:30. Turn down your lights, turn them off if you can. Get outside and see the clouds and say hi to the clouds. If you have managed to have some clear skies, that's even better. But, I'm going to be as pragmatic as I can and say clouds are nice too. On behalf of the RASC Montreal Center, thank you for joining us for Earth Hour. Thank you to our presenters. Please do revisit this presentation as well as our other ones on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/RASC Montreal. And you will also get a chance to hopefully log in advance and register for our April 9th talk. I will stop recording now and then open it up to a general discussion.